I found it in her coat pocket the morning after she left. A brochure, my name, my room number, a move-in date 3 weeks away. She had already decided. She just had not told me yet. What she forgot was that I spent 34 years reading exactly this kind of paperwork, and I knew precisely what to do next. The brochure was light blue. Not a pretty blue, the kind of blue somebody chose specifically because it is supposed to feel calm, like a waiting room, like nothing is wrong. There was a photograph on the front of a long hallway, very clean, very even, with little framed pictures hung at the same height all the way down. Maplewood Memory Care printed at the top in soft gray letters. I opened it because I did not know what it was, and there, in the fold, in Luna's handwriting, the kind I have known since she was 7 years old learning cursive at the kitchen table, were the words Mom. Room 14B. Move in March 3rd. I stood there and read it once. Then I read it again. I was not confused. I just kept reading it, the way you read something when some part of you is still hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something else. If this is your first time here, I want to ask you to subscribe before we go any further, and drop me a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. My name is Addison Miller. I am 70 years old, and I live in Clover Hill, North Carolina. In the same house my husband, Frank, and I paid off the year before he got sick. I spent 34 years as a head nurse at the county hospital. I retired 3 years ago when I was ready on my own terms. Frank died 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer. I am still here, still in this house, and the brochure that Luna hid in her coat pocket is now sitting in my attorney's file. I am telling you this story because I think some of you already know exactly the kind of fear I am talking about, even if nobody has said it out loud to you yet. The house has an oak kitchen table that Frank bought at a farm auction in 1987. He drove 2 hours each way to get it and came home with this enormous thing that was slightly too wide for the space, and he was so pleased with himself that I never said a word about it. We kept it. In the corner of the living room, there is a small reading lamp I bought when Luna was about 3, back when I was studying for my nursing board exams after she went to sleep. I used to sit under that lamp with a cup of coffee and my textbooks and listen for her breathing through the wall. This house is not a financial asset. It is every decision I made over 40 years. Frank's death was not a shock. I had worked in hospitals long enough to know what the end of something looks like, and I stood beside him and held his hand, and I did not fall apart. Not because I was not devastated. I was. But falling apart was not going to do him any good, and I knew that. After the funeral, Luna and Thomas offered to come stay for a while. Luna said it was to help. I said yes because grief makes people need to be useful, and I understood that. But I want to be honest with you, I did not need help. I knew the difference. Even then, Thomas is Luna's husband. 47 years old, works in finance. I mention the finance part only because it tells you something about how he thinks. Within the first few weeks of staying in my house, he started asking questions. Always polite, always wrapped in something that sounded like concern. He would say things like, "We just want to make sure you are protected," or "We only ask because we love you." He asked about Frank's life insurance. He asked what the house might be worth. He asked how my retirement accounts were set up. Each time I answered, and each time something in my chest tightened in a way I could not quite explain. I remember thinking it was just grief making me sensitive. Maybe it was. Or maybe I already knew something I was not ready to say yet. Thomas had one habit that I never mentioned to anyone. He left his shoes by the front door every evening, right in the exact spot where Frank used to leave his. I noticed it every single day. I never said a word. Some things you tuck away and do not look at directly because you are not ready to understand them yet. Do you ever do that? Just notice something and decide not to examine it too closely? They moved back to their place about 2 hours away after 6 months. Thomas kept calling, always friendly, always circling back to the same general territory. And somewhere around the fourth or fifth call, what had felt like concern started to feel like something I did not have a name for. The weekend they came to visit, I cooked. Roast chicken, green beans, the cornbread Luna used to ask for every single birthday when she was small. I put yellow flowers on the table from the grocery store because I wanted it to feel warm. The first part of the evening was genuinely nice. Luna told me about a trip they were thinking about taking. Thomas poured wine. For a little while, it felt like just a family at dinner. Then Thomas set down his glass and said, "The house must feel very large now, just me in it alone." He said it gently, the way you say something you have practiced. Luna was quiet beside him. I told him I was not alone, that I had Carol next door, that I had my doctor, that I was fine. Thomas smiled and said, "Of course, of course." He was just thinking out loud. He said many women your age find it easier to be somewhere with a community around them. Luna gave one small nod and looked at her plate. I changed the subject. We watched an old movie after dinner and said, "Good night," as if none of that had happened. What would you have done in that moment, sitting at your own table, hearing those words from someone you thought loved you? They left early the next morning before I was fully awake. I heard the car back out and I lay there a moment, listening to the quiet come back into the house. Then I got up and started tidying. That is what I have always done. Movement helps me think. Luna's coat was on the sofa. Dark green wool, the one she bought 2 winters ago. I picked it up to hang it, and something slipped out of the pocket and hit the floor with a small, flat sound. I looked down, a brochure folded into quarters, light blue, a hallway photograph, Maplewood Memory Care, and inside, in Luna's handwriting, "Mom, room 14B. Move in March 3rd. I set it on the kitchen table and went to make coffee, filled the carafe, measured the grounds, 2 scoops the way I always do, stood there listening to the machine start up. Outside the window, the rose canes were bare and brown, the way they go in late winter. I watched them, and I did not think about anything in particular. Sometimes your mind goes quiet when the thing in front of you is too large to approach all at once. I sat down at the oak table with my coffee, and I thought about what Thomas had said the night before. Many women your age. I had thought it was clumsy. Sitting there now with the brochure open in front of me, I understood it was not clumsy at all. It was a preview. He had been telling me something and had counted on me not hearing it clearly enough to push back. I did not cry. What I felt was quieter than that and heavier. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, Luna and me at her college graduation, both of us laughing. I looked at that woman holding her daughter's arm and tried to figure out when exactly she had stopped being a person and become something to be arranged. I could not find the moment. I only knew it had happened somewhere. And then I just sat there for a while. Then I rinsed my cup, folded the brochure, and called Carol. I told her I needed to talk. Carol did not ask questions. She said, "Come over when you are ready." Before she let me go, she said, "Addie, whatever it is, call Dr. Patricia first. Call your doctor before you do anything else." I did not know it yet, but that was the piece of advice that changed everything. I called Maplewood before I called Patricia. I needed to hear it directly. I gave my name. The woman on the other end confirmed that yes, a file had been opened for an Addison Miller. I asked who had initiated the contact. There was a short pause, the kind that tells you the person is deciding something. Then she said the initial call came from someone named Thomas. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in my own driveway for a few minutes, just sitting. Then I drove to Patricia's office. Patricia Owens has been my doctor for 20 years. She knows my medical history, my medications, the shoulder I hurt in 1999 that I never quite dealt with properly. She knows my mind. When I walked in and told her everything, she did not interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the one question that mattered. Who provided medical information about you to that facility? Patricia contacted Maplewood directly as my treating physician. 2 days later, the facility called me back. Not Patricia, me. The medical intake coordinator explained carefully that the information submitted on my behalf described cognitive symptoms that were completely inconsistent with my actual medical records. She said the facility has a legal obligation to verify all submitted health information before accepting any patient. She said they were closing the file. She asked if I would like a copy of the email they had received describing my condition. I said yes. Would you have said yes, or would part of you have been afraid to read it? It arrived on my phone while I was sitting in Patricia's waiting room. I read it the way I used to read a chart that had been filled out wrong, starting from the top, taking in every line. Thomas had written that I frequently forgot the names of people I knew well, that I was no longer able to manage my daily self-care, that I was a risk for leaving the stove on unsupervised. I read it through once. Then I set my phone face down on my knee and looked out the window at the parking lot. Not one sentence was true. I had spent 34 years reading fabricated assessments written by people trying to move a situation in a direction that suited them. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I called Margaret Liu that afternoon. Margaret handled our estate planning when Frank and I wrote our wills. She is the kind of attorney who does not use extra words. I told her I had documentation of someone submitting false medical information to a memory care facility in my name without my knowledge. She said, "Come in tomorrow morning." I printed the email that night. Margaret reviewed everything. Then she kept looking. What she found was that Thomas had been in contact with a real estate brokerage in Clover Hill, asking about an estimated listing timeline for my property. The projected start date for the listing fell directly after the planned Maplewood move-in date. Luna's name did not appear anywhere in the real estate emails. Only Thomas. I asked Margaret whether Luna knew about the real estate part. She went through everything again and said no, there was no indication. So here is what I understood. Sitting in that office, Luna had agreed to something without asking me a single direct question. That part belonged to her, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But Thomas had built something further than Luna knew, and those are not the same thing. Thomas had a plan. Luna had a husband, she believed. I was not going to treat them identically. I waited. Then Luna called and said she and Thomas wanted to come over Sunday to talk. Her voice was careful in a way I recognized, the voice of someone who has been told what to say. I told her Sunday was fine. After I hung up, I called Margaret and asked her to be there. Then I called Patricia and asked the same. They both said yes. That night, I placed the printed email and the brochure side by side on the kitchen table and looked at them for a moment. Thomas had not counted on a facility with a legal verification process, and he had not counted on a doctor who had known me for 20 years. He had planned for a version of me that did not exist. Sunday arrived the way hard days always do, ordinary on the surface. Sun up, coffee made, yard quiet. I heard their car in the driveway just after 11. I was in the kitchen. I heard the doors close. I took one breath and went to sit in our chair in the living room. Thomas came in first. He stopped when he saw Margaret on the sofa. He stopped completely, the way people do when a room is not what they expected. Luna came in behind him and looked at Margaret, then at Patricia near the window, then at me. You could see her trying to understand what she was looking at. I spoke first. I told them about the brochure, about the call to Maplewood, about the facility calling me back. I placed the printed email on the coffee table and left it there. I did not raise my voice. There was genuinely no reason to. Margaret identified herself and told Thomas clearly that his contact with the real estate brokerage had been documented, and that any further action would be handled through proper legal channels. Patricia said she had submitted a formal statement of my full cognitive health to Maplewood's file, and the intake was permanently closed. Thomas started to explain. He said the word pressure. He said the word temporary. He said he was trying to find a solution. I let him finish because I have sat beside enough people in hard moments to know that sometimes a person needs to say the thing out loud before they understand how it sounds. When he was done, I told him I had raised my daughter in this house and buried my husband from this house. I told him I did not need a solution. I needed to be treated like a person. Luna had picked up the email from the table while I was still talking. I watched her read it. I saw the moment she hit the line about me forgetting the names of people I knew. I saw her reach the line about me being unable to manage my self-care. Her face went still in a way I had not seen since she was 16. She looked at Thomas and asked him, quietly, whether he had actually written those things about her mother. Thomas did not answer right away. That silence was its own answer, wasn't it? He left that afternoon without saying anything that mattered. In the weeks after, things resolved the way they do when a plan collapses because the facts would not cooperate. Maplewood confirmed in writing that the file was closed. Margaret sent Thomas a formal letter laying out the legal exposure he had created for himself. The real estate brokerage sent no further communications. None of it required a courtroom. His plan had only ever worked if I did not find out. Once I found out, there was nothing left for it to stand on. Luna called about a month later. She did not make excuses. She said she was sorry. I did not say it was fine, because it was not fully fine yet. I told her I knew. We stayed on the phone a little while after that without saying much. That was enough for where we were, so I converted the front room into a monthly class. Basic first aid, CPR, the things that matter when something goes wrong and there is no one else there yet. I used the skills I had spent 34 years building, and I offered them to anyone in the neighborhood who wanted to come. Carol signed up first. A young couple down the road signed up the week after. Then Dylan, Luna's son, 19 years old, sent me a text asking if he could join. I texted back. Saturday morning, bring a friend if you want. Some mornings I stand on the back porch with my coffee and look at the rose garden. The canes are putting out their first small buds now, tight and green against the old wood. I think about Frank planting those roses without knowing how long they would outlast him, and I think about how a garden keeps going if someone keeps showing up for it. I am not thinking about Thomas when I stand there. I am not thinking about the brochure or the email or room 14B. I am just standing in my own yard, in the quiet I built, in the life I kept. And honestly, some mornings that is more than enough. They thought I needed to be managed. I spent 34 years being the person who walked into the room when things were falling apart and knew exactly what to do next. I know the difference between someone who needs help and someone being taken away from themselves. I am not going to confuse those two things again. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to fight to stay in your own life? And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe. I will be right here.